everyone, welcome back to a brand new video. Today we're going to be talking about my 30 or so least favorite cards in the history of the Pokemon TCG. Now I haven't played every era of the TCG, but I have played for a good decade or so. I'm just a casual player, but I've had my fair share of experiences with unfun cards. Now this is video just going to be a little bit unedited, unfortunately, so it's just going to be going through the cards. I'm going to have a blur on there so you can't see the rest of the cards, but I can't really do some high quality editing because my hand is broke. If you didn't see my last video, yep, my hand is broke. That's why there isn't the next part of like the Somewhat tournament coming out, which I will have probably in October sometime. I'll get that out, but until I get my cast off, it's very hard to edit. School doesn't really regard that though, because I'm still writing several page essays for college. Lovely. Anyway, I'm going to talk about my least favorite cards of all time. I'm a player, I have my bias. I've played good eras, I've played bad eras, I've played lots of expanded, I've played lots of standard, I've played lots of retro, especially in the last couple of years, so yeah, let's get right into it. Starting off, we have Sableye from Stormfront. This is the oldest card you'll see in here. We're going to go oldest to newest. I really don't have experience with cards prior to 2008. 2007, 2008 when Diamond and Pearl came out. That's like my oldest, experience of any kind of quality, quantity game-wise experience. And Sableye is just a nuisance. Now, if you didn't know, this card actually forced the game to have an emergency rotation in 2011 because when they brought back the black and white turn rules, which took all restrictions off of the player going first, this card, which allows you to just force you go first and donk with its overconfident attack, essentially made the game completely unplayable. So they actually killed off 2 years of Diamond and Pearl cards when Black and White came out in order for the game to be playable. Because with Sableye around, with cards like Crobat G at the time around, that were like it's like Zigzagoon, if you've ever played that card, where it drops a damage counter on one of your opponent's Pokemon. You're able to just easily donk your opponent, because there's also Scoop Up Net in the form of Super Scoop Up and in Poketurn back then. So you could easily put like 8 damage counters on their active Pokemon. Even a Pokemon with 130 HP was no match for a Sableye with its overconfident attack. So you'd easily just, almost like, I think it was like a 75% chance, someone did the math of like, donking the player on the first turn. We're not talking about that though. I didn't play that format. I'm talking about Sableye in the context of 2010, where it is part of a few different decks. It's inoffensive in Gyarados, because in Gyarados it's just used for Overeager and its Impersonate attack, which sets you up by searching your for a supporter card and discarding it, and then using the effect of it as the attack. This is pretty inoffensive. The card kind of acts as a way to set up your board, get your Magikarps in those card piles so your Gyarados can attack. I don't mind it there. Where I don't like it is in the Sableye decks and the Shenlock decks. The SP Lock decks that use Impersonate to fish for supporters to disrupt your hand. Cyrus's Initiative flips 2 coins for each head. You remove a card from your opponent's hand and put it at the bottom. You get to choose the card too, and it goes to the bottom, not shuffle, so they're not getting it back. Which, like in some games, just instantly wins you the game if you just hit your opponent going first with that, and they said don't have a good hand at all. But the main problem, if it was just that attack, it'd be fine. The main problem is overconfident. For one dark, if the defending Pokemon has fewer HP than Sableye's attack's base damage is 40. Now 60 at the time is actually a really good number. Obviously 70 would be better for these kind of attacks, but doing 40 damage, very relevant. And why that is that the best evolution setup Pokemon at the time was Spiritomb. Also had 60 HP, but its attack, Darkness Grace, Spiritomb is my favorite card of all time, by the way. Attack Darkness Grace damages it for 1 damage counter, but evolves one of your bench Pokemon. So essentially Sableye, it wasn't intended because Sableye was printed over a year before Spiritomb, but Sableye became the ultimate Spiritomb counter, able to, when it goes down to 50 HP, Sableye will do 40 damage, and then you boost that to 50 with either like a special Darkness Energy, which is around at the time, or a Crobat G, which would damage them by 1, like Galarian Zigzagoon. And essentially, this just became a way to, in these SP Lock decks, they just auto-win a lot of Evolution decks that are reliant on Spiritomb to set up, because they'll just take 4 prizes before the Evolution deck even has like a Pokemon on board, or they'll snipe those Pokemon immediately while just milling Spiritombs. And Spiritomb, 60 HP isn't a lot now. Now we kind of think of 60 HP as a joke, things like Radiant Greninja just hit 92 things. That would have never been a thing back then, for comparison, Garchomp hits 80 to 1 and it's the best attack in format back then. So it's like, back then, 60 HP, Spiritomb was supposed to last a bit, right? Even though it damaged itself, Spiritomb, especially because it slowed the opponent down, would generally last you like 2 to 3 turns. Especially against SP, which is what its thing was best at stopping, was stopping the item cards being played. So Sableye, just really unfun card to play against. If you've ever played an evolution deck against one of those SP lock decks, they're essentially over based on just what your opponent starts, and it's just not fun to play against. Then we have Violite. This is going to be in the context of specifically the Heart Gold to Soul Silver to Noble Victories format, but also it kind of applies going forward, and you're going to notice that things I dislike are pretty consistent throughout the history of the game, and one of those things is that I don't like support for basic Pokemon, and I don't like support for multi-prize Pokemon, and I don't like energy acceleration on items. We'll get to that later, though. And Violite says, if the Pokemon this card is attached to is a basic Pokemon, any damage done to that Pokemon is reduced by 20. Now, this card is really strange because it came out in the Noble Victory set, essentially Black White 2 in Japan, Black White 3 over in the West. And that format was the last format prior to EXs. And Violite kind of broke the game in a way. There was no tool removal at the time. I can't think of any. There might be an attack or two that remove tools, but no playable tool removal at the time. And cards like Durant, even with 70 HP, and then especially the big basics like Landorus, Cobalion, Virizion, Zekrom, Reshiram, like these cards that did not need any help got a lot of help. Reshiram and Zekrom and Tornadus were already great, not even to mention the, basics that came out in the Noble Victory set, like Durant, Cobalion, Terrakion, Virizion, Landorus, right? Those cards were already great. They definitely did not need Violite. Violite makes much more sense in the context of Next Destinies, which was Black White 3 Japan, Black White 4 in the West, which had the EXs, where the EXs, at that point, evolutions were just unplayable. Eviolite makes sense then because they're just, why buff anything else besides basics, because the evolutions aren't playable in the first place until like 2 to 3 sets later. I guess there's a Sableye, but that's about it. So like Violite makes much more sense in the terms of like the EXs, but in the non-EX format, basics did not need any help. This really made the game really toxic. There's not that many evolution decks, like evolution attacking reliant decks in the Noble Victories format, essentially just locking decks with Vileplume. That are the only ones that are like severely viable, like tier 1 contenders. Because the Violite's just stupidly broken. Just make it all Pokemon or just don't print the card at all. Next up, we have Bicycle from Plasma Storm, coming out in 2012. Another thing you're going to notice that I don't like is item aggro. You're going to see that quite a lot throughout these cards that I've highlighted here, and I guess that was kind of evident from my favorite card being Spiritomb from Arceus, which is a card that item locks as a basic. I do not like item cards that speed up the game. Bicycle draws cards until you have 4 in hand. Essentially, this card doesn't seem that good in like context just because it's very hard to lower your hand size sometimes, but with, at the time, Ultra Ball and Hypnotoxic Laser and, there's a ton of spammable item cards, especially played in Plasma back in the day, because they had a ton of spammable item cards in Hypnotoxic Laser, Ultra Ball, Plasma Ball, Colress Machine, all these spammable items. It lead to decks running like 40 items sometimes, and just running Bicycle just to speed through the deck as fast as possible. Especially this card was like a real sore spot for me when it came back in the expanded format in the Donk decks, because Donk decks and like these heavy setup Donk decks that like aim to win the game by clearing your board, like the Giratina Garchomp decks, because just drawing to 4 in hand on an item is really stupid. Any item cards that draw cards really have to be limited to like 1 at max, 2 on a coin flip maybe, or maybe 3 on a coin flip, I guess, if you're Roller Skates. Roller Skates didn't make the list because it's unreliable. Bicycle is always reliable and always good. So I just really don't like item aggro, and this was one of the key facets of that back in the day, and an expanded. Then we have red card printed in XY base. This card is unfun in expanded, and back at the time, it was just played as a one-of in a lot of decks. I believe 2018 was when it got banned, so basically before that, red card just saw played a ton of decks as a one-of. You just use it on the first turn on your opponent, and essentially you had like a pretty high chance if you played that in a locking card of just winning the game before they even got to win before they even got to take a turn. Just sets your opponent to 4 cards in hand on an item card. It's reset stamp, but good throughout the entire game. It's judge, but not your supporter for turn, so they could still play their supporters for turn. You know, and expanded at the time, Shaman was legal, so they'd draw like 30, 40 cards in their deck, get their entire board set up, use like 40 max elixirs, you know, all these, spam these items, poison you, sleep you, and then you'd go over to your turn and there'd be a stadium in play that doesn't let you use abilities. You'd have 5 cards in hand, and your opponent would be ready to hit you for about 300 damage on the next turn. So you can see why I don't like item cards like this specifically. There wasn't any counters to it, it's just your opponent prizes it, that's the counter to it, I suppose. Just really unfun ending the games. Very similar to Marnie, but Marnie at least was limited by the supporter rules at the time. Still, Marnie's really bad. Marnie almost made it, but I like Marnie in like a cube setting, so I didn't put it on the list just because I think it's a very fun card in casual, like cube as a one-of card. It's just bad as 4-ofs. Anyway, yep, red card, cringe, don't like it. Next up we have Pyroar from Flashfire, and you're going to be surprised because this is kind of a, like, I've talked about how much I hate basic cards, and this is kind of like a basic card stopper. You know, it's prevent all damage done to the Pokemon by attacks from your opponent's basic Pokemon. The attack's hardly relevant. Most Pyro Darts in Expanded can't even use it. Back in the day they did, just because they had, it was a little bit slower back then, but essentially, this card is, I either win the game instantly if my opponent cannot hit me, or I lose the game instantly if they can. And in Expanded, especially, this card became a problem for me because there's no way to really tech for it in your deck that's, like, reasonable. Because, especially when Evolving Skies came out, Basics essentially did not, or Evolution, sorry, just did not exist. ADP Dragonite was the best deck about 2 months into the Evolving Skies Expanded format. And the only deck that beat ADP Dragonite was Stall or Volcarona V, the other Hyper Aggro deck. So, and Stall would obviously be Pyroar. So, you know, 10% of the meta was Pyroar, Stall, 10% or Snorlax, Stall, one of the two. 20% was like Volcarona, and like 70% was ADP Dragonite. I'm not kidding you, I played probably about 3,000 games on ladder against ADP Dragonite in those few months. Or in the few months it was like the best deck until Shadow Rider was discovered. And it's just like, there was no good counterplay to Pyroar. There's nothing to turn it off because they banned Hex Maniac before that. There was nothing to get through it. Like I said, evolutions were just not techable because you were having to give up a significant amount of consistency in these decks that were just, you know, these decks at the time, ADP Dragonite and Volcarona V, were very discard heavy, very, I'm going to turn 1 attack you for 300 damage, or turn 1 Altered Creation in the case of ADP Dragonite, and you just lose if you can't respond to that kind of deal. So you can't put evolutions in your deck. You know, there's some small exceptions, things like Flareon GX popped up in some Volcarona lists just to counter it, but it's like you counter it once and then they lost zone it and then you lose anyway, so it's not worth even running. Yeah, it's just unfun. It's also extremely ugly. 5-band graphics. Shout out to one of the worst Pokemon illustrating companies out there. Like, man, like, I don't hate all of 5-band graphic stuff, but their early XY stuff is pretty atrocious. So getting blocked by a Pokemon is one thing, getting blocked by a really ugly Pokemon is one thing another. I will say, though, you can hit through this with Shred. That's what eventually some Dragon decks started doing, especially when Giratina V came out. Started taking the Shred Giratina V in there just to hit through these guys. So that's something, at least. I don't like Dragon types, though. Next up, we have Blacksmith. This is a supporter time that came out in Flashfire as well. Attach up to 2 Fire Energy cards from this compile to one of your Fire Pokemon. I actually just put a tweet out today on Twitter. Pokemon TCG official account was like, rank the types, and I ranked all the types, and like Fire and Fighting were the bottom. Dragon was like above that somewhere, and then Water, I believe. Those are my bottom 4 types, and Fire is always the worst. Fire is really bad. When Fire is good, generally the game is bad. Or like, you know, in the case of Sunlock, Blacephalon is good, but it's the one lame deck in a really cool format. So, Blacksmith attached 2 Fire Energy from this pile to one of your Fire Pokemon. I hate Energy Acceleration on item cards, and I also do not like it on supporter cards. This wasn't as good as, you know, later on Welder would be, but was still really good at the time in Fire decks, and Fire decks just at the time very simple. You know, you had Pyroar, and then later on you had, you know, Volcanion. There's some things in there like Camerupt along the way that play this as well. The fire decks, essentially the reason I don't like fire is because the fire decks are always really stupid and they don't do anything interesting. This isn't the case for like pre-expanded like Black and White, right? You know, we're talking like Diamond and Pearl before that, right? Anything before that, like fire types generally did interesting things, but like once like expanded got going, fire types were always just the epitome of just like big dumb cards made for like 10-year-olds who just learned to play the game. And pretty much the people who played fire even in like expanded when it wasn't good, it was pretty much all just new players to the game, just playing these like boxes with all these blacksmiths, welders, and a bunch of like fire crap in there. Just because all the fire things have one thing in common. They just take a lot of energy, they do a lot of damage, and that's about it. There's like nothing complex to the cards. Yeah, I just hate fire types. Next up we have Joltrik, the Night March Joltrik. Gnaw is not a good attack, don't worry about it. But, you know, actually, I should say something. Gnaw was a good attack when Rainbow Energy was played in some Night March lists, because you could attach Rainbow Energy to do Gnaw and attach a Muscle Band and do 30 to opposing Joltrik. That is a relevant interaction, actually, because Joltrik was, like, the best deck in form. Night March was, like, the best deck in format the entire time it was legal. And if you disagree with that, I mean, you just didn't play the era, and, like, I've played a little bit of the era, I guess, so I'm not an expert on XY, but pretty much, you either play Night March or you play Toad, which counters Night March. Later on we get Greninja Break, that's something, I guess, but, yeah, Night March is cringe. 20 times the number of Pokemon units compiled out of the Night March attack. I played a lot of Expanded in 2016 and 2017, going into the Sun and Moon era, and before Oricorio was printed, and, you know, we had Karen a little bit before that. There was just no good counters to this. Essentially every game they would just do, just get enough Pokemon in the discard pile to do 200 damage for a single energy with being double colorless. And you either lose to Night March on turn 1 or you lose to Night March on turn 3, depending on how things go. Before they decided to finally print some good counters to it. Obviously, there's some things like Item Lock. If you were going first and you got like turn 1 Vileplume, you know, obviously Night March would probably just scoop then, because they don't like playing actual games of Pokemon. They just want to win before you even get to play. But like, the deck was essentially like just a menace. Not fun. Thank God they printed Oricorio from Guardians Rising. That card's a godsend. Night March is cringe. Then we have Double Dragon Energy. This is my, if I had to give like a vote for my least favorite card of all time, this is probably top 3. This card can be attached to a dragon Pokemon. It provides 2 energy of any type, but only when attached to a dragon. If it's attached to anything, then the dragon, discard it. So essentially, they were like, Double Rainbow Energy was not good enough. Let's remake it so it doesn't have a damage reduction and doesn't, I think Double Rainbow had to be Evolution, non-EX too as well. So lots of restrictions. Double Dragon Energy is just be a dragon, get the most powerful special energy card ever printed. And if you don't think it's the most powerful special energy card ever printed, you haven't played the expanded format. Yes, DCE is great. DCE is more versatile, which is why it was more played in the eras, but expanded is entirely run by Double Dragon Energy. And it has been for like the last like 5 years. Ever since ADP came out. I guess that's 4 years ago, because that's 2019, end of 2019, so just about 4 years. And Double Dragon Energy essentially has ran the format, has been either the best deck or multiple of the best decks in the format constantly. The 2 best decks in Expanded at the time of PTCGO shutting down in my last experience with the format was Lugia Double Dragon and Regidrago Double Dragon. The best deck when I started playing Expanded a lot again around Darkness Ablaze, after taking a quick break from it, was Ultra Necrozma with Double Dragon. The best deck in the Evolving Skies format was ADP Double Dragon. The best deck in the Chilling Rain format was Tina Chomp Double Dragon. You know, like every single one of like the good decks in Expanded is run by Double Dragon because it's just the best energy card ever printed. Like, bar none. Special energy. Basic energy is obviously more versatile. And, like, you know, Double Colorless is more versatile as well. You see it in more decks in, like, its time of standard legality just because it's more versatile and they built more attackers around it. But this is undoubtedly the most powerful. Then we have Shaman EX. So Shaman EX is, I mean, I don't hate this card as much as the other ones just because I guess I'm getting a little bit biased because I'm looking at this really cool artwork. Set up, draw until you have 6 in hand when you play it on your bench. This is worse than Uxie in a way from back in the Diamond and Pearl era, but it's from a different time. Back when Uxie was printed, there was no Ultra Ball, there was no Sycamore, and there was actually punishment consistently for benching these things since you used more than like 2 spots on your board at a time when playing the Pokemon TCG, unlike in a lot of the XY early Sun and Moon eras, where you just bench like 4 Shamans. Like, who cares? I'll just pick them up later if I need to. And how do you pick them up? You either use Super Scoop Up, AZ, Ace Roll, or Sky Return. Return this Pokemon and all cards attached to it to your hand. So essentially, like, if you want a really good description of why this card is bad, go to Jason Sklezinski's blog and read the XY page that he did on his experience during the XY era. He describes this card better than I ever could have on just why it is like the worst card for the game. This was not the first in the line of 2 prize supports. That would be Joltrik EX, but searching a supporter is much, much more balanced than drawing cards. And the reason for that is, obviously, searching supporter is really, really good, but searching a supporter is not drawing you extra cards, it's drawing you cards that you had the potential to draw anyway, or, you know, finding a one-of supporter for your attack scenario, or gusting, you know, etc. Setup allows you to just draw a bunch of cards, and unlike Crobat V, which came later, which I don't... I mean, I hate Crobat V, let's be real, I hate Crobat V as well. But Crobat V limited itself to once per turn. Shaman did not. There was absolute chaos and expanded when Scoop Up Net released, because you could... Scoop Up Net was an item card that just picked up a Pokemon that wasn't a GX or V, and they didn't put EX on the wording, so you could just pick up Shaman with an item card for free. And that was insane. You could easily draw all 60 cards in your deck with Shaman, even without Scoop Up Net. You could easily do that in Standard, and that's why Lysander's Trump card had to get banned. It's because you could just loop Shamans to just draw spammable item cards. Yeah, this card did nothing good for the game. It definitely would have been better off not being printed. Though this art is very, very cool. Then we have Mega Mewtwo EX. This comes from my experience playing Standard and Expanded around 2016. Prior to Guardians Rising coming out, Guardians Rising provided some good counters for this card, but prior to that, this card was just a menace. Essentially, if it got set up and you couldn't one-shot it, you just lost the game. Because it would just move the damage over. It evolved from a Mewtwo that had a damage swap attack where you'd move all damage counters from it to your opponent's active, or you'd swap all damage, from them. So they just gust up like undamaged Pokemon on your side of the board and just move the damage off and completely heal Mega Mewtwo EX, completely heal it. And its attack is essentially Psychic Infinity is 30 more for each energy attached to both active Pokemon. Essentially, this ramps from either 70 damage if they just have a double close on, but more likely it's just KOing essentially whatever is in front of it. So, like I said, if you can't one-hit KO this, and there wasn't that many good Psychic techs at the time, it just completely ruined your day. The best tech, I guess, at the time was like Mewtwo from Evolutions. That was kind of a tech for this, but like, I mean, if you're having to play Mewtwo from Evolutions, like, come on now. Plus, they'd have to play into that too. If they knew the Mewtwo from Evolutions was coming, they don't have to one-shot you immediately. They can just damage swap over and over until you're like gonna just lose to a one-shot. So, yeah, this card was just not fun to play against. Then we have Latios EX, Roaring Skies. I should have put this before the Mewtwo. I think that's supposed to be because it's in release order, but whatever. Second attack doesn't matter. First attack does. Fast rate. If you go first, you can use this attack on your first turn. 40 damage. Essentially, this card was just used to win the game before your opponent got a turn. It was really big back when it first came out, especially because Shaman was everywhere, so Shaman was a huge part of why this card stunk, because you'd start Shaman EX in Expanded, and then your opponent would fast raid 4 plus powers, Hypnotoxic Laser, Laser Bank, or, Super Scoop Up to flip some heads and redraw with Shaman, keep going and pick up some more damage mods. Essentially, they just always win the game on the first turn. And it got way worse recently and Expanded with... Donkey's almost at its all-time best right now, I'd say, since the Shaman ban. Like, it was down for quite a while, but Zigzagoon being printed and Scoop Up Net being printed really, really helped the deck, and it's almost at its strongest it's ever been in Expanded. So Donkey was really, really good. Like, one of the best decks, like, unironically in Best of 1 Expanded, just because of... It just win the game before your opponent got to take a turn. And in Expanded, going second was like the requirement. Not when Latios first came out, so it's a little bit more balanced by that, but when Expanded had the supporter rule introduced in what was it, Sword and Shield. Essentially, going second was you either go second or you lose the game. So you'd always go second, and then they'd get to go first then, and they'd win. You should not be able to attack in the first game in the modern era. Bad. Then we have Hoopa EX. Earlier I mentioned that I hate support for multi-prize, you know, like EX, GX, things like that. I don't like support for those guys. Scoundrel Ring embodies that perfectly. Why print an EX that helps out basic Pokemon or, you know, evolution decks when you can print an EX that helps out other EXs? Wow, what a great idea. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench, you may search your deck for up to 3 Pokemon EX, reveal them, and put them into your hand. Shuffle your deck afterward. Oh my god, this card was stupid. If you played at the time, Mega decks, loved this guy. Any deck with Shaman could get at least good value out of it. I've seen people Scoundrel Ring for 3 Shaman before. It is a thing. This ability was just not good for the game. Stop printing abilities that ever help multi-prizers. It's never a good thing. You should be helping the single prizers because the multi-prizers in the modern era are already so far ahead. I guess in the XY era, you know, single prizers like Night March were always, you know, keeping them in line, but we've never really had a deck at the power level of Night March as a single prizer since Night March, so, I mean, I could be wrong. They probably expanded decks like Vespiquen and stuff, but, you know, thinking in, like, standard terms, very much been 2 prize central. Yeah, this card's cringe. Next up, we have Max Elixir. Look at the top 6 cards of your deck, attach a basic energy you find there to a basic Pokemon on your bench. Wow, this is everything I hate in one card. This is another card that probably makes the top 3 worst cards of all time. It accelerates energy with an item card. That already huge red flag. It attaches them to exclusively basic Pokemon. Another red flag. There is no limitation on the amount of times you can play them. My god, the red flags are all over the place. This is one of the worst cards ever introduced for the game. Playing back in the day and expanding, especially with supporters going first, essentially your opponent would just load up their attackers with multiple energy on the first turn of the game, and you just like lose because like if you just didn't have a good setup, you just lose because they get 3 energy on their guy, and you know, Buzzwole was a big thing. I hated this when Buzzwole came out because Buzzwole would go from having nothing on board, you know, if they went second, you know, you go first and you're feeling good about it. They go second, they double max Elixir, strong energy, absorption for 260. And it's like, oh, well, I just lose the game then. Gotcha. Okay, yeah. Let's go play Go Fish instead, because I don't lose in the first turn playing Go Fish. Yeah, this card's cringe. I don't know, I don't want to reuse the word, but this card is so bad for the game. It's got everything wrong with it there. The XY era was truly an era of all time. I'm glad I skipped most of it. Then we have Kiawe, first card in the Sun and Moon era, and if you don't know, PRCGRI, otherwise known as Primal Clash Guardians Rising, the 2017 North American Internats format, is one of my favorite formats of all time. And it's because it has a variety of decks. None of them feel too overpowered, though Garbodor is really, really good, Drampa-Garb and Espeon Garb. And like, another thing is that Volcanion is good, and Max Elixir is cringe, but Garbodor exists, and Garbodor says, you know, I don't like you playing that Max Elixir, so I'm going to punish you for playing it. Well, then next up, they're like, well, you know, we need to give fire types more support. Volcanion, being one of the best decks, isn't good enough. We need to make it, like, even better. So they printed Kiawe, and they printed Ho-Oh GX, and they printed Salazzle GX. This card and its consequences for the game were so bad. Playing ladder at the time, obviously I'm a casual player, I don't go to many tournaments, but having a card that accelerates 4 fire energy into play, you know, turn ending didn't matter. You could use supporters going first, you just use them in turn 1, it's like, okay, you're going to die next turn, can you respond to 4 energy on a Ho-Oh GX turn 1? No, okay, I guess you lose the game. That's kind of how it was back then, not very fun. As you see, this is the second in the line of fire acceleration supporters that I've been mad at. I don't like energy acceleration cards in general, as long other than Pokemon energy acceleration, and even that has to be pretty specific for me to like it. Yeah, this card is so bad. We went from a really fun format in Primal Clash Guardians Rising to you either played Golisopod, you either played Gardevoir, or you played Fire in the World's format, it felt like. Which is when this card came out in Burning Shadows. Golisopod was really fun, but it also lost to fire, so, you know, sad. Then we have Pheromosa, the other fast rate attacker. It does 30, but if you go first, you can use attack on your first turn. And like you may be thinking, oh, this only does 30. This is just worse than Latios, which does 40. You're wrong is the thing, because here is why. There's a Beast Energy that when attached to an Ultra Beast, its attacks do 30 more damage. So this is actually doing 60. And it's like, well, will they hit the energy? Yes, they will. They draw the entire deck on the first turn. This is why Donk was so good in Expanded before I stopped playing, obviously, when TCG Live came out, is because, you know, easily, like, even like a 200 HP Pokemon could be taken down on the first turn if you started it, because they just play Zigzagoons, and they pick them up, so there is, you know, minimum 8 damage counters there. You know, they draw their cards like a Rangaroos, Bicycles, things like that, to keep going through the deck. Plus power, so there's another 40 damage. Muscle Band, so there's another 20 damage. Well, we're up to 80, 20, so 100 plus another 20. No, wait, no. So 80 is the Zigzagoon plus pickups, then there's the 40 from, that's a 120 for plus power, then 140 for Muscle Band, and then 200 for Fast Raid. And that's not even counting in Super Scoop Up, which is a coin flip, but can still even add more damage with Zigzagoon. Essentially, the only deck where you didn't get knocked turn 1 is like if you're playing a tag team, or if you bench multiple Pokemon at once. But if you know anything about Pokemon in the context of supporters not being allowed going first, benching multiple Pokemon in your starting hand is actually a misplay, because your opponent doesn't have any way to shuffle them in. So it's Red Card and Reset Stamp were banned, so, and Marshadow were banned as well. So like in order to counter Donk, in the expanded ladder, and Donk was so common, it was about 25% of the ladder. I didn't talk about then the Evolving Skies thing, because it's definitely not a real deck, but it's like 25% of the ladder in every set past Zigzagoon being printed. You'd have to bench multiple Pokemon. You'd have to play badly to beat Donk, and you'd have to play like, you know, like I said, you'd have to play like a bad player to beat a deck, and that was just so humiliating. And when you flipped over the cards and it wasn't Donk, it's like, well, I have now, you know, played badly and I'm going to get punished for it. But when you didn't bench those cards against Donk, it's like, well, I just lose the game. So, you know, when it was that big of a meta share throughout Expanded, you kind of had to play into it. Yeah, don't ever print these again. Then we have Mimigar. We're to the tag teams now. We're really to the bottom tier era of Pokemon. About half of the cards span these 8 years, and about half of the next cards span the next 4 years. This card is obnoxious. I don't hate Shadow Rider being the best deck in Expanded for like a year when it was, but I hate Horror House because it just one energy. Essentially, your opponent can't play any cards from their hand next turn. That doesn't matter. Essentially, it just means take an extra turn. It's literally just basically what it does. It's just take you an extra turn. Because if they can't play any cards, they just do nothing. And Poltergeist 50 times the amount of trainers you find in your opponent's hand. With the effect of Horror House, you essentially just, if your opponent has one Pokemon in play and their opponent went second with Mimigar, you just win the game, because you get them to a big hand size by forcing them to take a turn that they can't do anything on, and then you just one-hit KO them with Poltergeist, or you'd go in with a Shadow Rider that's fully charged up and just win the game. Yeah, this card is horrible for the game. Tag teams in general, some of the worst cards ever printed. Then we have Pika ROM, another tag team. This is the single prize murderer. Yes, it can be killed by some single prize counters like Buzzwole, Zapdos, things like that, that were basics, notably, and attacked for 1 energy. But this thing absolutely, well, I'm gonna just say that if I said what this deck did to Evolution single prize decks, the ones that were viable in the Sumlot format, I would be banned from YouTube for saying the words of the carnage that this deck brought to those. So I'm not going to say them. But essentially, Full Blitz, 3 energy, 150, accelerate 3 energy to one of your benched or one of your other Pokemon, or not even other Pokemon, you accelerate to any Pokemon in play if that's yours. Meaning you can charge it to this guy, which is what a lot of people did, go full greed. 3 energy seems really heavy, but because there was nasty cards in the format, I decided not to put them in here because it'd feel redundant, but Thunder Mountain would be another card that I hate, and Tapu Koko Prism Star, another card that I hate. Essentially, if they went second, it was about an 80% chance they were getting that Full Blitz off turn 1. And against Single Prize Evolution deck, there's your KO, and then they'd throw 3 energy on here because it's not a tournament, so full greed. In a tournament, obviously, you could maybe play a little bit more conservative by accelerating another Pika ROM on the bench, but usually they just accelerated So this guy had 6 energy. So then Tag Bolt, if you have 6 energy attached, is 200 to active, 170 to bench. And by that point against single prize decks, you've taken 3 knockouts and they just lose the game, essentially. They're way too far behind. So unless they're running, like, you know, basics like Buzzwole that just win by hitting Pika ROM for weakness, you just lose. Then there. And even things like that, you could use Full Blitz Tag Bolt. I saw this done all the time back in the day. Full Blitz Tag Bolt, and you skip the Buzzwole, because the Buzzwole's attack only does 120 to this guy if they have full, or if you have, I think it's if your opponent has 4 prizes remaining, yeah. So they just go to 3 prizes and skip that 4 prize turn, making Buzzwole useless. So yeah, this card's definitely not good. Moving on. Oh boy, another fire card, another tag team. Who could have guessed that the epitome of fire, big basic, tag team, stupid, big number card would make this? Yeah, this is definitely like top 3 as well. Well, I don't know. This is very close. I can't decide, because there's a card coming up that is my least favorite card of all time that I can guarantee. This is up there for sure, though. 270 HP, ridiculous for a basic, bigger than any evolution card. For reference, the biggest stage 2 GXs, the Sun and Moon era, like these guys you had to get in play that were hard to get in play, were like Metagross 250. This guy's 270 basic. Just stick it down. Why play 12 cards in your deck plus like rare candies when you can just play 1 card in your deck that's bigger and does more damage? Outrage, 30 plus 10 for each damage count on this Pokemon. Unironically, one of the worst things they could have put on a card, which is a basic with 270 HP, because any deck that doesn't one-hit KO this thing, which is kind of hard to without weakness, means you're getting one-hit KO'd in return with Outrage. Super easy to spam as well. And if your opponent just can't respond to the Outrage damage, Ram Charizard, you just lose. Flare Strike, this is the main attack, 4 energy, 230. Can't use Flare Strike during your next turn, doesn't matter. Switch cards at the time, you know, things that remove effects from play. The downside didn't matter. It was essentially just kill what's in front of you as long as it's not a tag team. If it's a tag team, add some damage to it, and you kill the tag team as well. 230 KO'd every single, like, viable GX at the time that wasn't a tag team, because all the stage 2 GX kind of disappeared. So, like, you know, stage 1s like Zoroark died to Flare Strike, which had 210. You know, I can't think of other stage 1 GXs, but most of them I don't think were actually even usable by this point. And then Double Blaze. So, you know, at the time, I was a big fan of Bronzong from Team Up, because it walled all damage from fire Pokemon. I was like, wow, this is like anti-stupid. Like, this card is just built in. Bronzong literally has like a high school graduation requirement on the job interview put on the front of it. But Reshiram and Charizard said, I'm not going to graduate high school, I'm just going to kill you regardless and just shoot you, dumbass Bell. If this Pokemon has at least 3x fire energy attached to it, really easy to fill, does 100x damage, does 300 damage, killing anything in format essentially, and not affected by any effects in the opponent's active, meaning it went through Bronzong's fire block. So essentially the only thing that stopped this thing didn't actually stop this thing. So if they just got this going in 2 turns, really easy, you know, turn 1, Welder attach, there's 3 energy, turn 2, Welder attach, 3 energy. A lot of times this would just bowl over stall regardless, just because it just get through it way too fast. This is the peak of big dumb fire, big dumb basic, no thought required. Average IQ of Reshizard player is at least in the room temperature, you know, 60 level, so watch out for the Reshizard, though. It's just big and it just does too much to deal with. Oh, and here's what's enabled it. Welder, the 3rd fire accelerating supporter on this thing. Attach up to 2 fire energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon. If you do, draw 3. So essentially this is just, you just play 4 Welder in every fire deck, because accelerating 2 energy on a supporter card with Blacksmith was already broken. But what if it also was your draw engine for the deck? So you weren't like punished for like you were for playing Blacksmith, where you had to give up your supporter for turn. It's just like, oh, yeah, it just draws you cards anyway. Yeah, this is like arguably one of the best supporter cards of all time. It was so broken. I never want to see this card again. Powered up so many dumb decks like Reshizard, like Mewtwo Mew later. Later on, you know, things like Centiskorch. There's nothing good came from this card. Then we have ADP. I mentioned that earlier with ADP Dragonite when I was talking about how much I hated that deck. So you could almost guarantee that this deck was going to make an appearance, or this card was going to make an appearance. I didn't play a lot of Standard this time. By that time, I was kind of converted to the cult of Expanded, because in Expanded, you can actually counter this thing with Pokemon Ranger. It's not a good counter to it, but it's a counter that exists, and there's also Famba. which kind of is okay at countering this thing. Essentially, double Dragon Energy, Altered Creation. For the rest of the game, your attacks do 30 more damage and you take one more prize card. Don't worry about all this extra text here. It's double Dragon Energy. It goes off. Ultimate Ray, double Dragon Energy, plus Tapu Koko or Max Elixir, 2 other cards that I've mentioned while talking on this list. Do 180, KOing Dedenne or Crobat, and take 3 prize cards, while powering up your next guy to take 3 prize cards. This is the peak, even in Standard, but it was crazy, because even in Standard, this card was a 3-turn game. You'd turn 1 Altered Creation, turn 2 Ultimate Ray, turn 3 Ultimate Ray, and you just win the game. Or turn 3, use your other attack if this guy had been knocked out by then, that you powered up with Ultimate Ray. One of the worst cards designed of all time. I think I'll get some flack from people who were 6 at the time Unbroken Bonds came out and really liked playing with this card, but I don't think many people are going to give me flack for including ADP on here. Maybe Valkyrie from the Discord. They've got notoriously bad takes about loving this card, so ignore them. Then we have Dedenne GX. This technically should have been by the Unbroken Bond stuff, whatever. Shout out to Cool Sheep. I hate this dumbass rat. 160 HP, Day-Day change ability. When you play from hand onto your bench, discard your hand and draw 6 cards. Yes, this is the successor to Shaman EX, except for instead of just drawing up until 6, it does at least limit it once per turn, but you discard your hand, draw 6 instead of drawing up to 6, which is arguably even better, because you're just drawing fresh 6. You'll notice in a minute that I really do not like discard draw. I haven't mentioned Sycamore and Juniper, which were kind of honorable mentions for this list, but I do not like discard draw because it is very antithetical to good gameplay. Point in case, Sunlot doesn't have discard draw, one of the best modern formats, and arguably the best modern format, and the best retro formats are pre-discard draw and post-Oak being rotated. So the attacks don't matter, however you could use them. I only hate it though because of the ability. These attacks printed on its 160 HP Pokemon would be the worst thing ever printed. Instead it got this ability and became the best GX Pokemon, up there with Zoroark and Tapu Lele. I'd say it's even better though just because of how toxic it was, whereas Lele and Zoroark was toxic in a different way. Lele was balanced. Love Lele. Goated. Yeah, I hate this card. By this point, evolution decks weren't that great anyway. Some of them survived into Unbroken Bonds, like the Weezing and some Zoroark decks. And Granbull, I think, survived into like Unbroken Bonds. But like once all the evolution support from the Sun and Moon first 4 sets and Zoroark rotated out, it's essentially just basics all the way down. And Dedenne was a huge catalyst for that, because discarding your hand and drawing 6 cards is a necessary evil. But, evolution decks don't like taking necessary discard your hand, draw 6 card evils. Notable that this thing feasts on Dedennes like nothing else. 180 damage when boosted by Altered Creation eats these things alive, so that's how that deck got its niche. Moving on, first Sword and Shield card, man what a bad era. We have Metal Saucer. Attach a Metal Energy from your pile to one of your bench metal Pokemon. I talked before how I hate Max Elixir. You may be surprised to not see Dark Patch and Aqua Patch on here. Dark Patch is very good, and I don't love it, but I don't hate it either just because it was balanced at the time. Darkrai really needed Dark Patch if it wanted to keep up with Mewtwo and Rayquaza and all the other crazy stuff that happened in the Black and White era. Aqua Patch wasn't very good. It was good on release with like Ninetales and like with Quagnag later on, but that's about it. Metal Saucer was unnecessary fine-tuning for Zacian V, which was very close to making this, but Metal Saucer was extra energy acceleration for a Pokemon that already came in with built-in energy acceleration. Intrepid Sword is one of the best abilities ever printed, arguably the best ability on a V other than the V-Stars and the Crobat in power level. God, I hate this. ADP Zacian, really dominant deck. 3-turn games were really common with that deck. In Expanded, this thing was a menace with Dialga Zacian, which essentially would just take extra turns while knocking out your Pokemon. You essentially just lose the game if they get off their turn 1. Timeless GX for 150, that takes an extra turn. You essentially just concede the game at that point. This card would later come back with other Dialga degeneracy. Apparently Dialga's making a splash in Japan right now. They still play Expanded, though, because they didn't have TCGO, their Expanded is always like a year and a half behind our Expanded. And apparently they're complaining about Dialga as well. I saw that on Twitter recently, so I at least have some solace knowing that one day Dialga may be banned from the Expanded that I can no longer play on TCG Live. I wouldn't want to play on TCG Live anyway because the client's horrible. Anyway, item acceleration, terrible. Overtuning for an already, like, overtuned card, terrible. This card's bad. Research. Oh boy, I mentioned how I hate discarding and drawing. Here is research. And why this makes a fine return to the thing rather than Juniper and Sycamore is because when Juniper and Sycamore were printed, Juniper more so was a balanced card, because when it was printed, you know, there's things like Junk Arm and reusing resources. So the best cards up until the like rotation of the Heart Silver cards in 2012 after 2012 Worlds. Honestly, the best draw cards were like N and Professor Oak's New Theory, Shuffle Draw 6, and N, obviously everyone knows what that does. And like Sage was really good in like Vileplume decks back then. So there's a really wide variety of supporters. Only really aggro decks got to play Juniper. Sycamore kind of changed that, being a 4 of in every single deck the entire time it was legal, besides like the lock decks. But research came out, and there was all these cool things about the late Sun and Moon era in the supporters. If nothing else, ignoring Welder, the Sun and Moon last block had a lot of cool supporters. You know, think greens, think the tag team supporters, Hapu. What are some other cool ones? Bill's Analysis. I really like greens. Greens is my favorite. And the tag team supporters, despite being tag team cards, were very, very good. And then research came out and said, why play any of those? Oh yeah, Clay and Roxy, also very cool. Why play any of those cool cards when you can go back to playing 4, discard, draw 7 in your deck? And that's what everyone did. For basically like up until Rapid Strike was released, like every deck was just 4 research in it, other than the Welder decks, because they just literally just played like 40 items in Welder as their only supporter card. This was so bad for the game at the time. I was so sad it came back because it's one of the only good things about the tag team formats is that they didn't have this card, and they didn't have the next card we're going to talk about either. Those were the only redeeming traits of that era. That's why Sumla is goated, because it's like the only, well, it's one of like 2 formats that didn't have tag teams, that didn't have these, didn't have research in it. So anyway, my least favorite card of all time is Boss's Orders. This is just the worst one because it's Rainbow Rare. I hate Rainbow Rares. Switch one of your opponent's best when they're active. This card came back at the worst possible time, coming back at the same time as ADP Zacian's height in popularity. You cannot make this shit up. They printed 2 of the worst supporter cards around the 2 worst Pokemon that just benefited them. Evolution decks be damned, you are not going to evolve, I'm going to bring you up and slaughter you. And like, yes, we had Lysander back in the day, which I also did not like, but Lysander was more balanced, and I liked its tech ability in decks, especially because people didn't play 3 or 4 copies of it. People just played like 1 or 2 with Versus Seeker, which I really liked, very cool. Versus Seeker at the time, because Versus Seeker was counterable, supporter cards are not. So if they played only like 1 or 2 and then they, you know, got item locked, they'd be punished. There's no punishment for Boss's Orders. You lose, you get nothing. Good day, sir. Bring up that benched evolution Pokemon that you want to play and get that silly shit out of here. We are only playing 300 HP basic Pokemon. You know, I also hated Pokemon Catcher during Black and White. That's a card that was close to making it, but I had too much fun abusing that for it to be here. Truthfully, I had way too much fun playing that myself back in the day, so I can't flaunt it too much, I guess. Yeah, Instant Gust is always bad on trainer cards. Pretty much always. It has to be very conditional. I really liked Custom Catcher. That was one of the few good things about the tag team eras, that Custom Catcher was there. I really liked Guzma, despite being Instant Gust on the supporter card. It took more skill to play Guzma, and I know it doesn't sound like it because we all got so used to playing Guzma, but I was there when Guzma released, and tons of people lost games because they played Guzma thinking it was Lysander, not having a Pokemon ready for Guzma. You have to build your deck around Guzma, having a pivot Pokemon, or play your turn with Guzma in mind, and then suffer if you overcalculated and weren't able to get the Guzma off that turn while having a Pokemon ready. So Guzma had a lot of skill built into it. Yes, there was Tapu Koko at the time, which made it a little bit easier, but Guzma was cool. Boss's Orders is Guzma, but minus 40 IQ Guzma. It's Guzma, but for dumb people. It's Custom Catcher, but for people who don't like building their deck around actually having to have cards at the right time. And all of the best retro formats in the history of the game come from times where there isn't Boss's Orders in there. That's a fun fact. before Pokemon Catcher, before Boss's Orders, when you had to like gust things with like conditional items or abilities on Pokemon, Pokepowers back then, those are good formats, and they're good because they don't have these two cards. When these two cards were printed, the game got bad, especially together. The game got worse anyway. There's good formats with like Lysander and Sycamore in them, like 2017 Primal Clash Guardians Rising, but the gradient scale for those formats is much lower because most of them are bad because these two cards exist in their respective forms at the time. These came back at a bad time. They've been printed ever since. Please God, rotate them. I am so sick of these cards that make the game bad. We've got Boss Orders Getsus printed. That was the only obligation this card could have possibly fulfilled, is making another cool Getsus card. So get rid of them now. Then we have Air Balloon. This is a really odd choice. I don't think I'm going to see anyone else put this on here, but it's a personal pet peeve of mine. Retreat cost this Pokemon's card's attached to is Colorless Blast. If you don't know what this is designed for, it's designed for Zacian V. And it may not seem like it, but Zacian V has an attack where it couldn't attack the next turn, and Air Balloon reduced that by 2. It wasn't always played in every Zacian V deck because a lot of them just played Force Switch because that's easier and dumber and got ADP out of the active too. But what this card does, and why I don't like this, while I do love Floatstone. Floatstone's a very cool card. It was balanced because of Tool Scrapper and being around, and punishment for tools, like the Tool Drop deck and things like that. But Air Balloon is dumb because it restricts the viability of Pokemon to Pokemon that have 2 or less retreat cost. And yes, there was stuff that was viable that wasn't that. Pika ROM, but Pika ROM also had free retreat Zeraora in the deck. There was like Colossal, but Colossal was just good for one set. It wasn't actually good, it just good because it killed Pika ROM. But like cards like this vastly limit the creativity of deck building because they restrict one of the best effects in the game, being a retreat cost of 2 or less, a retreat cost of -2 rather, because retreat cost reduction is one of the best effects in the game, like bar none, one of the best effects in the game on a tool card. Floatstone is like the single best tool card, arguably, of all time. And why that's so good is why Floatstone is good. It's universal. This card is like, okay, so only these Pokemon can be good. Everything else has to be bad, or you have to play inoptimal switch. So it really limits the viability of decks. But ironically, this Pokemon we're talking about next, Eternatus, got away with that just because this deck never needed to switch. Eternal Zone, if all your Pokemon in play are Dark type, you can have up to 8 Pokemon in play, and you can't have any non-Dark Pokemon in play, or that stops working. It'd be really cool if there was ways to counter this that weren't just like auto win. They banned the supporter card that would have countered this because they said it was because it was too good. It wasn't. They did not ban. The Bryson Man supporter. That card that Stall decks played. They did not play it because it was good in the stall. They played it because it countered their new meta deck that was coming out. And they didn't want that to happen. They don't tell you that, but that's literally why. It's because it limits the bench size to 3 for both players, and Eternatus would hate that, so they banned it. And Dread does 30 for each Dark Pokemon in play. If you can count numbers, that means you're doing 270 with 9 Dark Pokemon in play, 8 on the bench, 1 inactive. So essentially, this is just the peak of what we call canned decks. Fusion Strike kind of did that too, but Fusion Strike's at least a little bit more creative in its way of the fact that the fusion Pokemon are just cool and they have cool attacks. This guy is basically your only big attacker in the deck. It played like other things sometimes with the Weavile GX, but that was pretty bad. And then occasionally you saw like some you saw the smaller attackers, like Hoopa and I don't know what's the other guy. The other Hoopa, Yveltal was a big one back then. Yeah, essentially what this does though, and why I don't like this over something like Mega Rayquaza, is because I don't like Mega Rayquaza either, but it limits you to only playing Dark Pokemon, so it very much, it like builds your deck for you. You put this deck together and it's like, okay, 4 Eternatus V, 3 to 4 VMAX, 4 Crobat, and 4 like niche Dark Pokemon, Liepard V or Hoopas or Yveltals. It literally just builds the deck for you. And that's why we call it a canned deck nowadays. We see the same thing with Fusion Strike, see the same thing with Rapid Strike, Single Strike. Some of those decks branch off to more than others, but most of these decks stay about 50 cards the same. That's why we call it a canned deck, because Pokemon built the deck for you. They printed Crobat V in the set just so it's like, okay, I have Crobat V now. which goes in my, wow, look at that, convenient. Dark-type Pokemon, I can play Dark-type Pokemon, wow. Oh yeah, Zigzagoon's also played in here too, another card that was played in here. And then they printed Hoopa in the same set, because they're like, okay, here you go, here's your other mandatory Dark Pokemon to put in the deck. So here's your deck, choose 1 or 2 cards and you're good to go. I don't like those decks. This is like the peak of like canon deck. You could argue Fusion Strike is too. I just like Fusion Strike a little bit better, I guess. Then we have Palkia V-Star getting up there. You'll notice we skipped year 2 of Sword and Shield here. I was tempted to put Dragonite, but I didn't. Dragonite V. And I was tempted to put, you know, a bunch of cards from like Evolving Skies, but I didn't. I chose not to. I chose to skip the Single Strike, Rapid Strike stuff, because at least there's something cool there. Palkia V ruined what was going to become a really good format. And if you don't know, the Sword and Shield Brilliant Stars format is the best format in the Sword and Shield era, in my opinion, because it is a diverse format. It may not look like it with Arceus in every deck and Inteleon in like every deck, but what the format essentially was is that it was all of these decks with similar builds outcompeting each other with the techs they played. You also had, you know, niche stuff, things like Whimsicott V-Star, Shaman V-Star even. You had lots of one prize counter box, and you had Mew VMAX, which was still really, really good at the time. So like one prize counter box were really, really good because they countered Mew and they countered Arceus. It was a very centralized metagame, but the gameplay was very good. There was a ton of viable rogue decks. Suicune V was really good at the time, and the designers saw Suicune V being already one of the good decks in the format. I think it was like the 6th most popular deck or something like that at the time. Suicune V Ludicolo. And they were like, what if Suicune V Ludicolo had like 50 more HP, did 20 more damage with its already good attack, so it didn't have to play the Ludicolo in there to boost its damage? And what if also Accelerated 3 Energy to play got a exclusive Radiant Pokemon printed just for the deck primarily when it came out? Yeah, what if we overtuned an already good deck? And then Origin Form Palkia came out and became like 90% of the meta in the first few tournaments, because it is another extremely overtuned, unfun card. It killed off every single rogue deck. The format had to completely redesign itself. Only like 1 or 2 Arceus decks prior to Worlds coming out and the, you know, Arceus Pika box being explored. It was really just Arc Intel, so like all of like the 10 different Arceus decks that were viable in the format prior, none of them are good anymore. I think Arc or Aggron saw play at Worlds, but that is a very, very niche deck for a reason. So essentially it's like, it took this good format, this came out, it turned everything on its head, it is way too good. Why does he not have arms? Yeah, I've said everything I need to say on this. And last but not least, we have Lugia V-Star. So after Palkia went and threw everything on its head, we had a chance for redemption. Lost Origin brought a lot of cool Lost Zone cards to the game, really made the intrigue of the game go up. And when Silver Tempest was revealed, we all thought that this kind of looked like a nothing burger set. We're like, yeah, you know, the Lugia card kind of looks cool, but I don't think it's going to do anything. And then Lugia went and did exactly what Palkia did by becoming 90% of the meta at all of the tournaments it went to. And even throughout its worst times in the format, it was having like 30% meta share. Even at its lowest, it was better than like it ever should have been, that anyone could have expected when the card was revealed. And I was really excited at the time before Lugia came out, because I was like, oh, we're going to have the first block format, Sword and Shield to Crown Zenith. We're going to have the first block format in a decade, in over a decade, because the last block format was Diamond and Pearl Arceus. And I don't like Diamond and Pearl Arceus, 2010 Worlds is better, but like the idea of like an actually legal block format is very cool. I was like, oh, I should build the block format, because Lost Origin was not a bad format. Palkia got a little bit more checked in that format, so it wasn't absolutely stupid as it was in Astral Radiance. And then Lugia came out, and everything that wasn't Lugia or Lugia counter or Lost Zone became bad. So there went my dreams of building a very fun and diverse block format. Yes, I know a lot of people say that Lugia counters did come out and became interesting. You think of the Articuno box, and you had, you know, better Lost Zone variants that came out to tech for it, but ultimately, like, the problem with all of these decks is that it's not a very diverse metagame. It's a very centralized metagame with a lot of things trying to counter specifically just Lugia. So I found the gameplay very insufferable. In Expanded, this card is arguably just as bad because you can get turn 1 Lugia V-Star in play with Wally, Summoning Star for 2 Archeops, Accelerate, Double Dragon Energy, oh boy. You know, I'm going to call Double Dragon Energy my least favorite card of all time instead of Boss. They're number 1 and 2, interchangeable, whatever. But Accelerate Double Dragon Energy to Giratina Garchomp and remove your opponent's Pokemon for play and win. So it became another turn 1 Donk Win deck, but it also had like potential to attack throughout the game as well, which other Donk decks didn't have. So this is currently like the best deck in Expanded. I think it took like 40% of the last Japanese Expanded tournament. Top cut, so very popular, very unfun. And yeah, I mean, there's all the cards right there. My 28 least favorite cards of all time. This went on for a very long time. It is about an hour now. So wow, thanks for sticking with me, talking about the worst designed cards in history of the Pokemon TCG. If I don't like a card, that objectively means it's bad because my opinions are always correct. If you like any of these cards, go outside. I don't know. I was gonna say, you know, like, get a job, but you know, you could just play Pokemon cards all day and that's more fun, right? Anyway, bye-bye.